What happens when a broken man and a dying horse find each other at the exact moment both have nothing left to lose? And somehow, that shared emptiness becomes the foundation of something neither could have built alone. This is the story of Dacre, Corporal James Earl Whitfield, born in Harlan County, Kentucky, the fourth generation of a family that had worked horses since his great-great-grandfather rode cavalry in the summer of 1863. A man who came home from 2 tours in the Kandahar province of Afghanistan carrying wounds that never showed up on any medical chart. A man who sold his last horse on a Tuesday morning in March of 2014, walked back into his house, locked the door, and told himself that chapter of his life was finished. He was wrong, and the proof arrived on 4 trembling legs at 5:47 in the morning, on October 9th, 2019. You have to understand what James had lost before you can understand what showed up at his gate. Harlan County sits in the southeastern corner of Kentucky, deep in the Appalachian coal fields. For generations, families there built 2 things: coal and horses. The Whitfields built horses. James's grandfather, Earl Raymond Whitfield, established Whitfield Quarter Horse Ranch on 47 acres in 1951. The same year the Korean War pulled young men out of those same hills. The land had a creek running through the lower pasture, a red barn with a tin roof that rang like a drum in July thunderstorms, and a reputation for producing animals of extraordinary temperament. James grew up inside that reputation. You know, there's something that happens to a child raised around horses. A particular kind of patience gets built into the nervous system. Studies in equine-assisted therapy have documented this for decades. Children who spend significant time with horses demonstrate measurably lower cortisol responses to stress. James Whitfield had that kind of childhood. He enlisted at 22, came home at 26. And what came back wearing his uniform was not entirely the same man who had left. Post-traumatic stress disorder affects approximately 11 to 20% of veterans from the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. That's roughly 500,000 men and women carrying invisible injuries through ordinary American streets. James was one of them. He didn't sleep. He startled at sounds. He sat with his back to walls in restaurants and stopped going to restaurants altogether. His marriage to Dana Lynn Whitfield, née Combs, began to fracture along the exact seams where silence had no business living. The horses helped, for a while. Then his father, Robert Dale Whitfield, died of a stroke in January of 2013, leaving the ranch in debt, $87,000 owed to a regional agricultural lender, money borrowed during a drought year when the hay market collapsed. James tried to hold it together for 14 months. He sold 12 horses, then 6 more, then the ranch itself, in a transaction that netted him almost nothing after the debt was cleared. The last horse, a 12-year-old quarter-horse mare named Clementine, was loaded into a stranger's trailer at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning. James stood in the empty barn afterward for 40 minutes without moving. Dana found him there. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. He told her later that standing in that empty barn felt like standing inside his own chest. By 2019, James and Dana had rebuilt, carefully, partially, the way you rebuild a fence post by post, rather than all at once. They had 31 acres outside of Corbin, Kentucky, a different county, a different creek, no red barn. James worked as a maintenance supervisor for the Whitley County School District, earning $43,200 a year. They had a daughter, Rosalisa, who was 7, and a son, Thomas Earl, who was 4. They kept chickens. They did not keep horses. James had made his peace with that, or something that looked enough like peace to function. Then October 9th arrived. He was up at 5:30. Veterans with PTSD frequently report disrupted sleep architecture, waking before dawn as a baseline condition, not an exception. And he walked out to check on the chickens before the house woke up. The morning was 38 degrees Fahrenheit, ground fog sitting in the low places, the smell of cold mud and wood smoke from a neighbor burning brush a quarter-mile east. He heard it before he saw it, a sound he knew from 20 years of working with animals. That particular kind of labored breathing, the wet catch in the chest of a large animal in distress. At the gate to his property, collapsed on its side in the gravel and the frost-stiff grass, was a wild Mustang. You should know something about wild Mustangs in America. Under the Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act of 1971, Approximately 83,000 wild horses currently roam federal land across 10 western states, but the Bureau of Land Management also holds nearly 60,000 in off-range corrals and pastures, animals gathered from overpopulated herds. Horses escape holding facilities. They travel distances that seem impossible. This particular animal, a gray roan stallion estimated at 6 years old, had a BLM freeze brand on his neck, the number 27448, suggesting he had been in the system, processed, released, or escaped, and traveled an indeterminate distance before arriving in the dark at a fence post in Corbin, Kentucky. The horse was severely dehydrated. A deep laceration ran along his left shoulder, wire fence most likely, from the pattern and depth. His hooves were cracked and overgrown. His ribs were visible. James stood at the gate for approximately 30 seconds. He later told Dana it was the longest 30 seconds of his adult life, because something in him wanted to walk back inside, to call animal control, to let someone else handle it. He had made his peace. He had put that chapter away. But the horse turned his head, and those eyes, any horseman knows this, those eyes were not panicked. They were exhausted. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that exists beyond fear on the other side of fight and flight, where an animal simply runs out of the energy required to be afraid anymore. James had felt that exact exhaustion in a combat outpost in Kandahar province in August of 2009. He recognized it. He opened the gate. What followed was not a movie moment. It was 4 hours of cold ground and careful hands. James warmed water in the house, Dana awake now, Rosalie and Thomas watching from the kitchen window with enormous eyes, and brought it out in buckets, letting the horse drink slowly, a little at a time, the way you rehydrate an animal that has gone too far into depletion. He cleaned the laceration with materials from a first aid kit that had been sitting in his truck for 3 years. He covered the horse with a moving blanket from the garage. If you've ever had an animal find you when you weren't looking for one, drop a comment below. Those stories deserve to be told. He did not call a vet for 2 hours. Later, he explained why in a way that said more about him than he perhaps intended. I needed to know if he was going to fight to stay first. If he wasn't fighting, there was nothing a vet was going to change. The horse fought. The vet, Dr. Patricia Holloway, of the Corbin Large Animal Clinic, arrived at 8 in the morning and later described the stallion's condition as severe but survivable, contingent on proper care over the following 6 to 8 weeks. Her estimate for treatment, approximately $3,800, a figure that landed on James like a physical weight. He paid it. He didn't tell Dana the exact number for 3 days, which she later described as very on brand for him. The Bureau of Land Management was contacted. The freeze brand confirmed the stallion had been part of a Nevada gather in 2016, processed through a facility in Reno, and placed in an adoption program from which he had been purchased, and apparently lost or released, sometime in 2018. Legally, his status was complicated. James filed the appropriate paperwork to formalize care and begin the adoption transfer, a proceeding that took 4 months and cost him an additional $620 in filing and legal. He named the horse Harlan. The psychology, trauma researchers describe a phenomenon post-traumatic growth, the measurable positive psychological change that can emerge from struggling with highly challenging life. It is distinct from simply recovering. It involves a fundamental revision of one's relationship to vulnerability, mortality, and meaning. James Whitfield, by every observable measure, had been in a kind of managed survival since returning from Afghanistan. Harlan's arrival did not cure him of anything, but it gave his nervous system something it had been missing, a purpose that required his specific knowledge, his specific patience, and his specific history with animals that had built up in him across 4 decades of living. You cannot manufacture that kind of fit. It either arrives or it doesn't. By spring of 2020, Harlan was standing in a paddock that James had built with reclaimed lumber over 17 weekends, alongside 2 additional rescue horses, a 23-year-old thoroughbred named Cora and a paint mare named Sunday, acquired through the Kentucky Horse Council's rescue network. James had spent those winter months studying equine-assisted therapy certification programs. He enrolled in the Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship International, PATH International, training in January of 2020, completing his certification in November of the same year, despite the disruptions of the pandemic that reshaped that entire period. Whitfield Farm opened formally in March of 2021. It is not a large operation. 31 acres, 5 horses now. A rebuilt red barn, not the one from Harlan County, but one that rhymes with it, with a tin roof that rings in the rain. James runs certified equine-assisted therapy sessions primarily for veterans and first responders, charging on a sliding scale that allows sessions from $0 for those with no means to $60 for those who can contribute. In 2023, the farm served 114 individual clients across 287 sessions. 3 of those clients, in documented case notes shared with James's permission, described the experience as the first time since returning from service that they had felt, in their words, safe. Dana runs the administrative side. Rosalie, now 12, has the same relationship with Harlan that James had with horses at 12. That particular patience building itself into her nervous system. Thomas Earl, 9 years old, is less interested in horses and more interested in the chickens, which James says is completely acceptable. There is something worth noting about the specific legal and financial architecture of what James built. Whitfield Farm is registered as a 501c3 nonprofit, which means contributions are tax deductible, and the organization is insulated, to a degree, from the kind of agricultural debt spiral that destroyed his father's ranch. He structured it this way deliberately. He had studied what broke his father. A single bad year, a single creditor, no diversification of legal protection. The nonprofit structure distributes that risk. It also, and this matters enormously in rural communities, makes the farm eligible for USDA rural development grants, 2 of which James has successfully applied for, totaling $64,000 in infrastructure support since 2021. Historically, rural family farms have faced existential pressure from debt cycles since at least the farm crisis of the 1980s, when more than 200,000 American farms were lost to foreclosure in a single decade. The structural vulnerabilities James's father experienced were not unique to the Whitfield. They were endemic to small agricultural operations that lacked legal and financial sophistication. James's non-profit model is one answer to a problem that has been destroying family land for generations. On the morning of October 9th, 2024, exactly 5 years after Harlan collapsed at his gate, James Whitfield walked out before sunrise. At 5:30 in the morning, 38 degrees, ground fog in the low places, the smell of cold mud and something burning somewhere east. He stood at that gate. Harlan was in the far paddock, gray in the gray morning, alive and solid and his. A horse who had traveled an unknowable distance to arrive at the exact right place. James said later that he stood there for a while. He didn't say how long. There is a version of James Whitfield's story that ends at the empty barn in 2014. That version is about loss. Clean, complete, finished. But human beings are not structured for clean finishes. We are structured for return, for the gate opening again. Post-traumatic growth research tells us that the people most likely to experience it are not the ones who suffered least. They are the ones who found something outside themselves that required exactly the capacities their suffering had built in them. James's 2 tours in Kandahar did not prepare him for a career in finance. They prepared him to sit with a terrified, exhausted creature in a cold field at 6 in the morning and understand, without language, what it needed. The question this story asks, and it's worth sitting with, is this: what have your hardest years made you capable of that you haven't used yet? And maybe more uncomfortable, what gate have you been keeping closed?
Oh, before you go, if this video made sense to you, subscribe to the channel. This helps YouTube deliver this content to even more people. Also, leave your like. It's essential for our growth here on the platform. And if you want to support us even more, Super Thanks is right below and helps directly with the production of new content. Comment here where you're from. And thank you for watching us until the end. See you in the next video.